Bethlehem Year Zero. The news with Martin Lewis.
It's heading in from the east, and the experts say it spells trouble ahead. Does the brightest star in living memory mean war and disaster in the Middle East? We'll be tracking the progress of the star from our live camera on the roof of an observatory in Galilee. Astrologers and other political experts predict major upheavals in the region as the whole night sky is lit up by the comet. Other headlines? Fury mounts among militants opposed to the government of King Herod. Can Rome's most hated ruler keep the lid on Jewish anger? What a time to call a census. A whole country is on the move to satisfy the taxman in Rome.
And from the rebel province of Galilee, does the message in the skies mean a return to terrorist violence?
Good evening and welcome to a new nightly report on the unfolding crisis in the Middle East. A crisis, according to some astrologers, which could make this year zero in the history not only of the region but of the known world. The speculation has been triggered by the appearance in the eastern skies of one of the brightest comets since records have been kept. First reports of the phenomenon they're already calling the Star of Wonder began to come in from the east 2 months ago. Its trajectory is steady, proceeding at the rate of 2 degrees of longitude every day in a constant westerly direction. At the moment, it can be seen from the eastern city of Palmyra. It seems to be heading to the south of Damascus, the Syrian capital, and it could pass over the Jewish holy city of Jerusalem and on towards the heart of empire in Rome. The comet follows extraordinary activity among the planets, which, according to experts, could threaten the authority of Rome itself in the region. Over now to our special correspondent in Jerusalem, David Jessel.
It fell to one of the most obscure astrological centres in Herod's kingdom to spot the comet and make the discovery that set political analysts in a frenzy. The Sea of Galilee Astrophysical Laboratory in Degania Aleph. Here they've been monitoring an extraordinary conjunction of Mars, Saturn and Jupiter, something that happens only once in every 800 years. Experts here claim that the involvement of Saturn, the star associated with Palestine, is a clear pointer to where any major activity is likely to break out. As for exactly what's going to happen, well, Jupiter is of course a royal sign and Mars, as we all know, means war. But it's that extra element of the comet that's giving political analysts and stargazers here greater cause for concern. That's because comets are always linked to major upheavals. Earlier today, I asked a leading astrologer if the comet on top of the conjunction meant war was inevitable.
It's too early to say. One view of the comet taken against this conjunction is that it could suggest a major shift in the power structure of Palestine. We know that the Jews are very dissatisfied with their conditions at the moment. They're deeply resentful of Roman rule. They live in the constant expectation that their God will somehow intervene. Whether or not that's what the stars and the comets say, or whether or not there'll be war or there'll be violence, it's too early to be sure. But the message from the heavens is that it does look likely.
So from a tiny observatory in Galilee, the first indications of great events to come. This is David Jessel in Degania Aleph.
Palestine has for a long time been one of the most potentially explosive areas of the Roman Empire. The country is right on its eastern fringe, a buffer state against the barbarism beyond. The Jews, who believe they have a divine destiny, have been under foreign control for most of the last 500 years, witnessing a succession of occupying powers. Many Jews resent being governed by a ruler handpicked by Rome. The present king, Herod, is particularly unpopular. His critics call him a puppet king conducting government by fear. And the outside world is becoming increasingly concerned about his regime, as reports grow of massacre and genocide carried out on Herod's instructions. Richard Lindley reports.
I'm in a place called Bethlehem. It's a small village about 6 miles outside Jerusalem, and this is the closest journalists can get to Herodion. You can see it behind me here. It's a huge man-made fortress built by Herod as his weekend retreat. Herodion is typical of the massive and grandiose building projects springing up all over Palestine during Herod's rule, glorifying not only Roman power, but also, according to those opposed to the regime, Herod's own thirst for glory. The construction program has led to huge taxes being levied on the local population. But that's not the only thing that offends the Jews. When Herod erected a symbol of the Roman Empire, the imperial eagle, on the very doors of Jerusalem's temple, he offended both nationalist and religious sentiment in this deeply devout corner of the empire. Jewish extremists pulled the eagle down, were promptly arrested and executed on the spot, some of them burnt alive. Mass execution is, in fact, a regular feature of Herod's rule. He's also executed members of the Sanhedrin, the Jewish religious parliament, when he considered them a threat to his authority.
It's a police state. I mean, he has his spies everywhere. He's got an enormous amount of collaborators. I mean, you can look around. I mean, you don't know whether your neighbours are your neighbours in the sense that they're part of your community or whether they're serving his forces.
And we can now go over live to Richard Lindley. Richard, I gather that Herod's terror tactics are not confined to his subjects.
Well, that's absolutely true. Herod's already killed one of his wives, and he's had his favourite eunuch and two of his own sons executed.
How does Rome see him?
Well, just as long as he keeps a lid on the troublesome Jews, then Rome is happy with Herod. But Rome has no illusions about him. The Emperor Caesar Augustus said a rather witty thing the other day, referring both to Herod's cruelty and to his Jewish kosher diet. "I'd rather be Herod's pig," he said, "than his son. That way I'd stand a better chance of staying alive."
Richard, thanks very much indeed. Well, with me in the studio to discuss the prospects for Herod is Douglas Davis, the London correspondent of the Jerusalem Post. Douglas, clearly a jumpy time for Herod and all those who live under his rule.
Absolutely. And this is very much complicated by his medical condition, which we believe might be affecting his judgment. He's always had a reputation for ruthlessness, and this might suit Rome very well because they believe that this is the only language the Jews really understand.
How are the Jews reacting? How close are they to rebellion?
Oh, they're very much on the brink, but they always are. The Jews believe that they're the chosen people, and as such they deeply resent Rome's rule over them, and they regard this as something of a national blasphemy. Herod is considered to be only half Jewish, and the Jews believe that ultimately God will intervene and save them, perhaps even violently. Every year you have religious zealots rising up and winning support from some of the extremist dissidents. And this usually fizzles out. And when it doesn't, Herod is there to make sure he puts it down with his instruments of state terror.
Douglas, thanks very much indeed. You are watching Bethlehem Year Zero, a special bulletin on the unfolding crisis in the Middle East. Still to come, a report from Galilee, the rebel province whose armed guerrillas threaten Roman law and order. And with thousands of families on the move to register for the census, where are they all going to stay? But first, more on those prophecies of war. If trouble breaks out, the crisis is most likely to be centred in the north of the country, the area known as Galilee. Galilee has a history of rebellion against Roman rule and a tradition of producing revolutionary hotheads. From Galilee, here's Linda Bryans.
The Sea of Galilee. It looks peaceful enough, but traditionally this is bandit country. The sea itself is a massacre site. It's here that up to 50 members of prominent Jewish aristocratic families were forcibly drowned, not by Herod, but by their own countrymen, when Galilean rebels turned on them and accused them of collaboration with Rome. And here in the caves of Mount Arbel, local Jewish separatists from Nazareth and other dissident hotspots tied up an entire Roman legion in their bid for independence. There's anger, too, at the new levy to finance Herod's building works. People here already pay tribute to the empire and tax to the temple. This extra community charge has made some people say enough is enough.
It's very difficult to find a job, and it's very difficult for people to stay in business here because there is no customer. It's very hard to make a living here. It's very, very hard.
It was here in Galilee that Herod first brought himself into favour with Rome when he was appointed governor here at the age of 20. His brutal suppression of the Galilean revolt led by Hezekiah went down very well with the emperor. Now promoted to King of the Jews, the stakes are higher, with the new star prompting speculation that his very survival may be at stake. This is Linda Bryans on the shores of the Sea of Galilee.
Now the census. As if the region wasn't already on the brink of turmoil, hundreds of thousands of people are on the move after the imperial tax decree. Entire families have been told to report back to their ancestral towns and villages to register for tax purposes. From Bethlehem, just outside Jerusalem, here's Jonathan Elkins.
Numbers, numbers, numbers. Rome's bureaucrats are never satisfied. Bethlehem's tax office is one of the busiest in the country, in spite of the town being one of the smallest in Judea. That's because of its historic connections with David, the shepherd boy who grew up to be the great hero king of the Jews. Because so many people trace their ancestry back to David, hundreds of families who live in other parts of Palestine are coming to register here for the tax census. It's already put an incredible strain on accommodation in this small town. But the mayor says there'll be room for everyone flocking to Bethlehem to register.
People are very, very hospitable, and they might help one another and host one another in this night and the 3 consecutive days needed to be here in Bethlehem to be registered.
But this is a security nightmare for King Herod. The irony is that under Herod's own laws, gatherings of more than 3 people can be punishable by death. Yet in these highly unstable times, it is Rome itself that has put the entire country on the move. I'm Jonathan Elkins from Bethlehem.
So, clearly a tense time in the Middle East, and for the latest developments, we're going over to David Jessel, who is in Jerusalem. David, this whole political panic began with the stars and the comet, and that's why the media have descended on Jerusalem in such numbers. But when and where is the trouble most likely to break out?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. Events are certainly gathering their own momentum here. These people are desperate for a change, desperate for some sort of new leader, someone like their warrior hero, King David. And that's why the star, whatever it may turn out to mean, has got everyone, King Herod included, so fired up.
David, we're getting news of a new development here, a top-level mission from the east. We're looking at a convoy apparently containing 3 senior diplomats on their way to Jerusalem. In fact, we're just seeing them arriving at the front here. What can you tell us about them?
Well, you probably know as much about that as I do. Visitors from the east are extremely rare. This, after all, is the very edge of empire, the very brink of civilization, you might say. They could, I suppose, be astrologers following the comet. The East are the acknowledged world leaders in the field of astrology. Then again, if these rumours of war are true, maybe this 3-man team are some sort of diplomatic mission sent to try to mediate before things get out of control.
Thanks, David. And we'll be back tomorrow night with an update on that mission, of course, and the latest from David Jessel in Jerusalem and the rest of the news team in Palestine. Until then, from me, Martin Lewis, good night.
Bethlehem, Year Zero, the news with Martin Lewis.
The brightest comet in living memory is heading for Jerusalem. And with the stars predicting war in the Middle East, King Herod's court astrologers search for clues about the looming crisis. We continue to track the star from our live camera on the roof of an observatory in Galilee. In other headlines, mystery surrounds the mission of a 3-man top-level delegation spotted today on the road to Jerusalem. From the Dead Sea, we report on the hermits who say the stars foretell a new king, a holy war, and a whole new era.
This is the war of the children of light against the children of darkness.
And will it be baby number 2 for the miracle family of Nazareth?
Good evening and welcome to our special newsroom covering the remarkable events in the Middle East. There is still intense speculation about what's behind the 3-man diplomatic mission which crossed the border into Palestine last night. It arrives amid growing concern from astrologers about the true meaning of a comet that is turning night into day. Over now to our regular Star Watch feature, tracking the comet, already dubbed the Star of Wonder, as it sweeps in from the east. It's moving at a regular 2 degrees of longitude each day, and the latest we have from ground tracking stations puts it to the south of Damascus, the Syrian capital, and on course to pass directly over Jerusalem itself before moving out over the eastern Mediterranean. Meanwhile, Mars, Jupiter and Saturn are in Pisces, which, say the experts, is a sure sign of turmoil in the Palestine-Syria area, a region which is unstable at the best of times. But first, that mystery diplomatic visit. The high-level delegation from the East is said to be seeking a meeting with King Herod. This from David Jessel in Jerusalem.
The delegation was spotted crossing into Palestine late last night. Today we discovered the mystery convoy, believed to contain 3 senior figures, making its way to Jerusalem along the Jordan Valley. It was noticeable that King Herod's government was making no effort to meet the delegation, prompting speculation that they have arrived in Palestine on unofficial business. There are other reports that the 3-man mission is actually following the course of the star. If that is the case, they're likely to be astrologers. The East has better experts than those in Palestine, where the Jewish hierarchy disapproves of the science.
There are some wilder rumours. People at the border post here, where the delegation crossed into Palestine, claim to have seen some rare herbal remedies and Eastern ointments among their baggage. This could suggest that the mission is a top team of medical specialists, summoned by Herod to treat the terminal disease from which he's suffering, and which many people say is already severely clouding his judgment.
The fear is, in the seething alleys of Jerusalem, that any political uncertainty will give new impetus to the nationalist resentment that is never far below the surface in Roman-ruled Palestine. Herod's Gestapo keep a firm grip, but this deeply religious nation resents the pagan power of Rome and the terror tactics of genocide and mass execution which Herod uses to maintain his hold on power.
Meanwhile, all police leave has been cancelled, as the whole of Jerusalem waits to find out what's on the agenda of the top-level mission of the so-called 3 wise men. It could be an ultimatum, it could be an offer of mediation, it could just be some exotic alternative medical treatment for a king teetering on the edge of sanity. This is David Jessel in Jerusalem.
And within the last few minutes, David Jessel and his team have in fact tracked the mission down to a diplomatic function. They just sent these pictures from Jerusalem. There are the official cars and their drivers. Obviously a major security problem here. The police very much in evidence. They're waiting for the 3 top diplomats, already, as we heard in that report, being referred to as the 3 wise men, to break up for the evening and go back to their delegation headquarters. David tried to have a word with some of their retinue.
Can you tell us anything about the purpose of your mission?
No, I'm sorry.
You can't tell us anything about what you're
sorry.
doing? Or who you're going to see or anything?
We cannot speak with you.
You cannot speak with us?
No.
You can't give us any clue who you're going to see or anything like that?
Definitely no.
Definitely not. Okay. So we end no wiser about what the actual mission, what the purpose of the mission of the so-called wise men is. This is David Jessel outside the American Colony Hotel in Jerusalem.
Well, meanwhile, news agencies have been issued with a communique from the delegation. The communique confirms earlier reports that one principal purpose of their mission is to see King Herod. It goes on to say that, according to their own intelligence agencies, the star does not point to a coming war. But most sensationally of all, they say the star does mean they expect a new king. Well, I'm joined now by our court correspondent, Michael Cole. Michael, it all seems a bit strange. If there is going to be a new king, why would they go to see Herod?
Well, it's very tactless, to say the least of it. As we all know, the king is ill, but he's not dead yet.
Just how ill is he?
The situation is not good, Martin. I've got the latest medical bulletin on the king, and it says he's suffering from fever, itching, pains in the colon, lung disease, convulsions and eye problems, and other side effects of syphilis.
So not long to go. Who are the contenders for the throne?
Well, any contenders are going to keep their heads down. Herod's sister, Salome, recommended and persuaded him to put to death 2 of his sons, who she claimed were plotting against him. So this succession, when it comes, is going to be fraught and difficult.
Michael, thanks very much indeed. You're watching Bethlehem Year Zero, a special bulletin on the unfolding crisis in Palestine. Still to come. Rooted in righteousness, from the shores of the Dead Sea, the religious sect whose hopes of a saviour king are very much alive. And is it something in the water? 2 members of the same family whose mystery motherhood is the talk of Nazareth. But first, we go back to those rumours about a new king. There are no very obvious contenders to take over the throne, but one theory being openly discussed is that a new spiritual leader could emerge. For centuries, Jews have been waiting for a Messiah, a new Moses who will bring them freedom and salvation. That faith has been kept alive by hermits living in primitive conditions at the edge of the Dead Sea. This from David Jessel.
It's the lowest place on Earth. 400 metres below the level of the Mediterranean, a stagnant lake evaporating under cruel desert heat. But for years, the shores of the Dead Sea have been home to an extreme and exclusive religious sect, who now believe their time has come. The Essenes believe the world needs cleansing from corruption, as Essene scholar Dr. Magen Broshi explained in a rare interview.
Would you count King Herod and the Romans as bad people who are holding bad views?
Well, yes, absolutely. All the establishment is bad. Whoever is in the establishment, be it the empire, be it the present king, be it the temple establishment, all of them belong to the children of darkness.
In this harsh wilderness, they say they're preserving the true faith, studying the scriptures and laboriously copying out what have come to be known as the Dead Sea Scrolls. Among their files is the war rule. They believe, and this ties up with everything we know about the star, that war with the so-called children of darkness is inevitable.
This is the war that is going to precede the coming of the Messiah. The Messiah will come after the children of light, after long drawn battles, will win, and then will start a new age.
All this, of course, is treason both to Rome and to King Herod, a spark in this tinder-dry part of the world that could set the whole troubled region alight. This is David Jessel on the shores of the Dead Sea.
Well, more on that story later, and now the rest of the news. A Nazareth teenager claims that although she's still a virgin, she is expecting a baby. Some months ago, a relation of the girl caused a similar surprise when, well into her 60s, she gave birth to a son. Here's Linda Bryans.
This is Ein Kerem, just a few miles outside the walls of Jerusalem. It's a tranquil, sleepy suburb of the city. But the last few months have seen some quite extraordinary goings-on. A couple of mystery pregnancies have left locals wondering if it's something in the water.
Ein Kerem's school children seem like a normal enough bunch of children. But in a few years' time, there could be some very special kids in this playground. That's because a local woman, Elizabeth, the wife of Zechariah, received some quite astonishing news.
This local resident couldn't wait to tell me the gossip.
Listen, this is something that never happens. It has never happened before. Elizabeth, this old wrinkled woman, who lives just over there, not that far, just there. All of a sudden, she is pregnant and big as an elephant. Her husband is completely dumbstruck by all this. I've heard she will call her child John.
But that's not the end of the strange developments on the baby front. There may soon be another wonder baby among these newborns. Some months ago, it seems, Elizabeth's younger cousin Mary arrived here from Nazareth, and she too seemed to be pregnant in quite extraordinary circumstances. Mary said that she was still a virgin. The 2 miracle mothers-to-be spent 3 months here at Ein Kerem. Elizabeth's baby, John, has now been born, and Mary has left for Nazareth to confront her fiancé and deal with the inevitable gossip. Linda Bryans at Ein Kerem.
With me now is Rabbi Tony Bayfield. Rabbi Bayfield, what is the reaction of the Jewish community to this girl's claims?
I think almost uniformly compassionate. but I have to say with a certain amount of amusement as well.
Amusement? Why amusement?
The story is a fantastic one, isn't it? Here we have a young girl, scarcely into her teens, clearly got pregnant some way or another before she was married, and the whole story deals with that very unfortunate experience and episode. But believe it, no.
How does Jewish law regard pregnancy outside marriage?
Jewish law is not terribly concerned, shall we say, about premarital pregnancy. We'd really rather it didn't happen, but it's not the greatest disaster in the world. It's not the greatest sin. These things happen. The real problem for Jewish law is a child conceived in adultery. That's the real problem. That's a breach of marriage, but we don't have that in this case.
Rabbi, thank you very much indeed. And back now to today's top story, that mystery three-man delegation in Jerusalem. For the latest, over to David Jessel, who is there. David, what's happening?
Yes, it's been a day of extraordinary diplomatic activity. Last night we were speculating about the mission of the so-called three wise men. Well, by midday we'd learnt that they were actually looking for a new king. Diplomatically, of course, this has been a terrible blunder. King Herod sent the delegation packing, the message being, I'm the king around here, I have no plans to step down.
But that doesn't mean the crisis is over.
Oh, absolutely not. The so-called Star of Wonder is still heading for Jerusalem. It's getting ever brighter with its seemingly inevitable message of strife and commotion for the people of this region.
David, thanks very much indeed. And we'll be back tomorrow night with an update on that mission and the latest from David Jessel in Jerusalem and the rest of the news team in Palestine. Until then, from me, Martin Lewis, good night.
Bethlehem, Year Zero. The news with Martin Lewis.
The star that has created panic across the Middle East. It's now just over the palace of the hated King Herod, and it's slowing down. We're tracking the progress of the star from our live camera on the roof of an observatory in Galilee. Tension mounts as astrologers predict a major political upheaval in the region. In other headlines, inside the tyrant's fortress of torture, an exclusive insight into the horrors of occupied Palestine. Tax, tax, and more tax. Are Rome's revenue men bleeding this country dry?
And after yesterday's story about the miracle mother of Nazareth, with Bethlehem full for the census, just where will the baby be born?
Good evening. First, the latest on that comet. For the past few days, astrologers and political commentators have been tracking the bright light that's been closing in from the east. Taken against the planetary conjunctions of Mars, Saturn and Jupiter, it almost certainly spells major disruption in the region. In our regular Star Watch feature, tracking the comet as it crosses the eastern skies at a regular 2 degrees of longitude each day, we can see it is now almost directly over Jerusalem, and astonishingly, it seems to be losing some of its momentum, a phenomenon astronomers claim never to have seen before. Over to our special correspondent David Jessel at an observatory in Galilee.
In the last few hours or so, according to experts here at the Sea of Galilee Astrophysical Observatory, the star seems to have lost some of its momentum, but none of its intense brightness. Experts now believe that at this rate the star will come to rest somewhere to the south of Jerusalem. What puzzles analysts here is why the star should apparently be bypassing the region's most famous city. To the south there are no sites of special significance apart from Bethlehem, whose only claim to greatness is that it provided the Jews with their hero king, David. But close to Bethlehem there is Herodion, the weekend palace of Herod, the much-hated and mentally unstable king who is Rome's man in the region. Meanwhile, as experts here continue to track the wandering wonder star, nothing has been seen of the mystery delegation which arrived 2 days ago from the east, claiming that they were following it. There are reports that they've been ordered to leave the country after claiming that the comet heralded a new king of the Jews. This is David Jessel in Galilee.
And we've just received more news on the mission of the three Eastern leaders. This from Richard Lindley.
There were scenes of unprecedented security as the Eastern delegation sought a further audience with King Herod. Herod kept the mission waiting in what seems a deliberate diplomatic snub. Yesterday, the so-called wise men had announced that they were looking for a new king of the Jews. Herod's immediate reaction to this blunder was, according to diplomatic sources, frank and candid, or in plain language, he was furious. Today, surrounded by army, police and Secret Service personnel, there was another meeting. But when Herod's team arrived, the atmosphere seemed, if anything, even cooler. There seemed little chance of any further breakthrough after the two sides went their separate ways. Richard Lindley in Jerusalem.
Herod has been king in Palestine for more than 30 years. Installed by the Romans, he has steadily expanded his authority to become one of the major forces in the region.
When this former governor of Galilee was made king of the Jews, Judea was a small, landlocked state. Under Herod, the frontiers have expanded dramatically. Herod can boast that the kingdom of the Jews has been restored to the greatness it enjoyed at the time of King David and King Solomon 1,000 years ago. Herod, his name means heroic, has also rebuilt much of the city of Jerusalem, including the temple. But few have forgotten or forgiven him for ordering the mass execution of 45 members of the Jewish religious parliament. He's also begun a series of major prestige construction projects which are resented as monuments to the greater glory of Rome. And although Herod has permitted freedom of worship to the Jews, he has become increasingly unpopular and his rule increasingly tyrannical. This is Jonathan Elkins in Jerusalem.
Human rights organizations across the world have condemned the genocide conducted by King Herod in his efforts to maintain his grasp on power. We have secured access to films smuggled out of Herod's palace in Herodion by a Jewish dissident who admits he is part of the undercover movement to overthrow Roman rule. Richard Lindley has this exclusive report.
Outsiders call it Herod's weekend palace, but this man-made mountain built on the sweat of slaves has an altogether more sinister function. It's the center of Herod's terror state. Outsiders are not welcome in Herodion, but with the help of Jewish dissidents, we've secured these pictures of a fortress which has become synonymous with terror and palace intrigue. At least one of Herod's wives and his favorite eunuch murdered, 2 of his sons strangled by the state executioner after failed attempts to assassinate their father. But it's not just his own family Herod terrorizes. This is a police state with all the apparatus of surveillance, informers, secret police, and, here at Herodion, imprisonment, torture, and brutal suppression of any dissent. People are being thrown into Herodion's dungeons for a whole host of reasons, for refusing to swear an oath of allegiance, for supporting Jewish religious groups that won't collaborate with Herod, or just because one of Herod's henchmen has taken a personal dislike to them. We've taken a bit of a risk in getting as close to Herodion as this. One man whose identity we've disguised has told us about King Herod's reign of terror.
King Herod came into our village. He took all our friends, all the children, all the family, and he used them as target practice. He burnt them alive and he threw them to the animals. He is an animal. He cut out their tongues and cut off their ears and threw them to the animals. There are no words for him. He's a villain.
From the police state that is Herod's Palestine, this is Richard Lindley at Herodion.
You're watching Bethlehem Year Zero, a special bulletin on the unfolding crisis in Palestine. Still to come. Overburdened and overtaxed, the people of Galilee say they can't pay and won't pay any more to Herod or to Rome. And the world's media descend on Bethlehem in a race to find the missing miracle mother of Nazareth. The speculation stirred up by the arrival of the Star of Wonder adds further instability to a country on the brink of mutiny. It's not just the resentment of Roman occupation. The sheer poverty of most people in Palestine makes the population ripe for dissidence and subversion. This from David Jessel.
Just across the road from some of the most barren land in Palestine, these rich date palms near Jericho belong to King Herod. As for his subjects, they can either gaze enviously from outside the wire or work in the heat of the day, manicuring the palm trees to make dates fit for a king, but not available to anyone else. For most people, such luxuries can barely be dreamt of. Working this stony and unyielding ground is hard work at the best of times. And Herod's taxes have made things harder still for the Jews. They're taxed 3 times over. First, they have to pay tribute to Rome for the privilege of being conquered. That's about 12.5% of everything they produce. Next, there are the religious taxes, which get paid to the Jerusalem temple. That's another 10%, plus the firstborn males of any animal. They even have to pay 5 shekels to redeem their firstborn sons. On top of that, the Herod tax, to fund his lavish civil list, his palaces, and his grandiose building projects. It all comes to a staggering 40% before the peasants have anything they can call their own. At places like the Bethlehem tax office, there are scenes of increasing impatience, anger, and frustration. But refusal to pay the Roman tribute is tantamount to rebellion, and Rome would treat any tax revolt with immediate and devastating force. To strengthen their grip on the security situation, a thoroughgoing update of the register of the population in Palestine has been ordered by imperial headquarters in Rome. Meanwhile, things can only get tighter as the empire-wide decree that everybody should now register again for tax purposes comes into effect. This is David Jessel at the Bethlehem tax office.
Well, as David said in that report, the whole empire is on the move as families return to their ancestral towns to register for the tax census. And for some, the old, the sick and expectant mothers, the Emperor Augustus's decree is presenting considerable problems. From Bethlehem, here's Linda Bryans.
For days, the coaches have been clogging the narrow streets of this town, bringing yet more visitors to Bethlehem. The little town thought it had done everything to prepare for the census, but many of the new hotels planned for the influx of visitors are badly behind schedule. One problem is the David factor. This is the town of the Jewish hero King David, and thousands of families trace their ancestry back to him.
There is another rather special problem. Remember yesterday's story about a Virgin Nazareth teenager who claims she's expecting a baby? Well, she too, it seems, is of the House of David and so has to make the long trek here to Bethlehem. But that baby is due any day now. The question is, will she make Bethlehem on time?
Throughout the day, as the war forecast by the Star grows less likely, the correspondents who've arrived to cover the conflict find themselves on a very different mission, covering the very human story of the mother in a million, who is on her way back to her family home. This is Linda Bryans in Bethlehem.
Well, back now to our top story, the political threat to Rome's man in Palestine. And I'm joined now by David Jessel in Jerusalem and Richard Linley in Bethlehem. David, I gather the immediate threat to Herod has now passed.
Well, yes, it does seem that he's weathered the storm. The crisis, like the Star that got us all so excited about the prospect of upheaval here, seems to have passed. The Star has bypassed Jerusalem, and the mission of the so-called 3 wise men has turned out to be a bit of a damp squib. Not quite as wise, perhaps, as people thought, as there is absolutely no hint of any new king.
Richard, I can't believe that you were only a few miles from David, yet he is there in darkness. You are in what appears to be broad daylight.
Indeed. As David says, the Star has now bypassed Jerusalem, but it's now standing right overhead here, right on top of this small but historic settlement of Bethlehem, and it's lighting up the landscape all around. I must say, I've never seen anything quite like it before. It's rather like an eclipse in reverse. Instead of day turning into night, night is turning almost magically into day. Great beams of light are shooting out of the night sky from this incredibly bright star, which seems to be hovering overhead. The whole arid landscape, dotted with olive trees and sheep, is bathed in a supernatural light. It really is quite extraordinary, an astonishing phenomenon.
And David, any more news on the Nazareth teenager and the so-called miracle baby?
Well, no news. As you can imagine, the world's press has been scouring the town, checking on all the hotels, the boarding houses, the maternity hospital, everywhere, but I'm afraid there's no sign at all. That story seems to have been almost literally eclipsed by the astonishing phenomena in the skies over Bethlehem tonight.
David and Richard, thanks very much indeed. So, the much-heralded crisis in the Middle East may turn out to be nothing more than an astronomical freak. We'll be back tomorrow night with further developments. Until then, from the news team in Palestine and me, Martin Lewis, good night.
Bethlehem, Year Zero. The news with Martin Lewis.
The miracle birth has happened at last. The baby receives international recognition as the new King of the Jews. Details are still coming in, but the baby seems to have been born early this morning in a farm building on the outskirts of Bethlehem. In other headlines, Saviour of the world, that's my job, says Emperor Caesar Augustus, as Rome moves to dampen Jewish hopes. Tonight, the terror regime of King Herod stands on the brink of collapse as the empire holds its breath over a possible Palestinian uprising.
And as the search for the mother in a million switches to Bethlehem town, the experts say the miracle baby could answer the riddle of the scriptures.
Good evening. There have been extraordinary developments in the story we've been following all week, the bright comet which streaked across the skies from the east. We've been tracking the progress of the star from our live camera on the roof of an observatory in Galilee. In our regular Star Watch feature, we charted the progress of the so-called Star of Wonder as it sweeps in from the east at a regular 2 degrees of longitude a day. But yesterday, the star seemed to falter and now appears to have come to a complete halt, not over Herod's palace, as we originally reported, but over the small town of Bethlehem, just a few miles away. We'll bring you the latest, of course, on the Bethlehem miracle birth as it comes in. But meanwhile, let's go over live to Bethlehem, where we can see how the whole area has been transformed by the star. Here you can see the astonishing way the sky has been lit up by these almost surreal astronomical conditions. We're looking at shepherds in the fields, going about their normal business as if it was the middle of the day. In Bethlehem itself, people are wandering around the main square, marvelling at the effect. With us to analyse this extraordinary celestial display is our science expert, Professor Colin Humphreys. Colin, in plain and simple terms, what is going on?
Well, for scientists, it's really exciting. There's this brilliant star in the sky with a long tail, and scientists call this a comet. And a comet you can think of like a snowball. And as it approaches the sun burns off, it vaporizes the ice and the snow in the comet and gives rise to this huge vapor trail. So that's why a comet has a long tail.
All the speculation has been about war. Does this comet inevitably mean war?
Well, not necessarily. There's some very famous Chinese people, and they're saying that a comet is like a broom star. The broom's because of its long tail, and they're using a pun. They say it's like a broom because it signifies the sweeping away of evil. And the sweeping away of evil could be caused by a war, but it could also be caused by the birth of a great new king.
Colin, thank you very much indeed for that. Well, back to politics now, and clearly one man with a particular interest in the old order of things, if only because he represents them, is Herod, the deeply unpopular king, widely regarded as Rome's puppet in the area. News that the miracle baby is already being hailed as the King of the Jews poses an immediate threat to the tyrant's authority. From Jerusalem, here's Richard Lindy.
At Herod's Jerusalem palace, the lights were burning late into the night as his political analysts and security took stock of the rumoured rival to his throne. Information has been pouring in from Herod's web of secret agents who control this turbulent and potentially mutinous province on the fringe of empire. Yesterday's disastrous meeting with the so-called Three Wise Men, a delegation of Eastern leaders, not only enraged Herod with their claim that a new king of the Jews would soon arrive, they also rubbed salt into his wounds by saying they were looking for the anointed one. Herod has not himself been anointed, and in the eyes of the religious has no authority over Jews. Although Herod has tried to appease the Jews by rebuilding the temple here in Jerusalem, most people in this deeply religious nation resent the power of Rome. Crippling taxes have made them desperate for change. The claim that a new king is on the way has not only made Herod furious, it's given the people here fresh hope. Meanwhile, Herod has just issued this statement. It says that as soon as a three-man delegation has found the whereabouts of this new king, who, as we now know, has been born somewhere in the Bethlehem area, then Herod himself will want to go and pay his own personal homage to him. Well, of course, most people here don't believe a word of that. They think it's much more likely that as soon as Herod knows where this new king is, he'll move very quickly indeed to liquidate this threat to his power. Richard Lindley in Jerusalem.
You're watching Bethlehem Year Zero, a special bulletin on the unfolding crisis in Palestine. Still to come, Rome responds with contempt to Palestine's promised new king. And as crowds pour into Bethlehem to beat the deadline for the tax census, Herod's military join the media in the race to find the miracle baby. Let's go back to Bethlehem now, and with the region in a state of near hysteria, it's not surprising that people are reporting extraordinary happenings. There have been claims of a close encounter with some kind of supernatural beings. Linda Bryans has been following up those claims. Linda.
Well, the report comes from a group of shepherds in a field just outside Bethlehem, presumably experiencing the same sort of freak-like conditions that you can see now. And these shepherds claim to have had some sort of vision connected with the rumours that a new king will arrive as a baby in some farm buildings quite close to here.
So how seriously should we take these reports?
Well, I mean, you've got to be careful about what shepherds say. And in this part of the world, you know, they're regarded really as little better than thieves, because very often they let their flocks graze on people's land without asking permission. Indeed, they're held to be so dishonest that they're not allowed to be called as witnesses in a court of law. But having said that, the sheep that they breed in Bethlehem are specifically for the temple sacrifice. So perhaps these shepherds have slightly higher standards of integrity.
Well, yes, I was going to say, wasn't David, the hero, warrior, king of the Jews, a shepherd too? And he came from Bethlehem.
Yes, that's right. And there are some remarkable parallels. Rumours of a new David in David's city, reported by people who once did David's job. Now, that's not to say that it couldn't all be a coincidence or even some mass hallucination due to the extraordinary light conditions here at the moment.
Linda, thanks very much indeed. Well, more details are coming in about the so-called miracle birth. The teenage mother, Mary, was on her way to Bethlehem, the town of her birth, to register for the census. Jonathan Elkins has just sent this report from Bethlehem on the search for what the media are already calling the mother in a million.
Bethlehem's tiny local radio station suddenly finds itself sitting on three of Palestine's biggest stories. First, there was the Star, then the census and the accommodation crisis. And now, to cap it all, the woman all the media want to trace is headed for this modest, dusty hilltop village just 6 miles outside Jerusalem. And during the day, yet another development to put this little town right at the center of the media spotlight. The three-man mission of so-called wise men has arrived, convinced that somewhere among these crowds is the man they believe is the anointed one.
Now, Rome has been quick to respond to rumours of a change to Herod's rule, and our Rome Affairs correspondent Dennis Toohey is there. Dennis.
Well, of course, Martin, this isn't the first time that the Jews have got excited about the coming of a supposed new king. Emperor Caesar Augustus is already recognised as the saviour of the world. And as for bringing peace, everyone acknowledges Rome's record in bringing peace to the world, particularly under this emperor. And before people get too excited about the comet that's lighting up the sky, Caesar himself was born as a comet passed over Rome.
How does Rome expect King Herod to handle the situation now?
Well, naturally, Rome expects King Herod to deal with any local dissent. But one thing we can be sure of is that, if necessary, the empire itself will be ready as ever to send in a peacekeeping force.
But how serious is that threat? Political analysts have been consulting the ancient texts to see if there is anything in them to suggest that a child born to a young virgin in Bethlehem might turn out to be the future king of the Jews.
Here at the Hebrew University, while Herod's men have been scouring the intelligence files for rivals to the throne, a different sort of detective work has been going on. Dr. Tal Ilan was getting nowhere as she searched for references to possible successors to Herod. And then she had the idea of including in her search the extraordinary celestial events in the region.
I rather suspect that now people are going to turn their attention to the Holy Scriptures and the ancient prophecies in order to explain to themselves the events of Bethlehem. Now, as well as King, Jews and Palestine, I'm going to add to my internet search the word Bethlehem. And I'm going to hit search. And here I'm interested in prophecy. And here we have a verse from the prophet Micha, which is the only verse in the Bible indicating that the Savior of the Jews is going to come from Bethlehem. I think it's very interesting and also of some significance that we know that Bethlehem was also the place where King David was born, and there are many prophecies in the Bible which suggest that the Savior of the Jews is going to be of the house of David.
If the scriptures prove correct, there's trouble ahead for King Herod. Any new king, even a baby, claiming to be king of the Jews looks likely to have a radical effect on this region. David Jessel at the Hebrew University, Jerusalem.
As we reported earlier, local shepherds were alerted to what was going on, and they have taken reporters to what they claim was the scene of the birth earlier today. Over now to our special correspondent, David Jessel.
Well, they almost made it. The couple from Nazareth, who we now know are called Mary and Joseph, a local building contractor, were on their way to Bethlehem to register for the tax census. But maybe they knew it was impossible to get a room there. Maybe the baby had its own timetable. Whatever the reason, the couple stopped here at this hilltop hamlet on the outskirts of Bethlehem. And it's here that the baby was born. Earlier today, reporters were led to the small settlement on a hill above the Bethlehem Road. We could inspect the scene by daylight. But already the family had moved on, leaving just the farmer and his sheep behind, to register for the tax census in Bethlehem. The farmer showed us the birthplace, little more than a cave hacked into the sandstone, typical of the farm outhouses in this outpost of the Roman Empire. The local families remain still hardly able to believe what's happened here and the sudden media interest in their simple home. Although the star and the planets prompted talk of a new king, there's no history of political activity in the family, though they are of the house of David. But then so is nearly everyone around here. It's been a totally unexpected development, an astonishing climax to a story that's caught us all out. An imminent war seemed to be a certainty predicted by the star and the planets. Then talk of a new king with the arrival of the mission from the east. That got us all guessing about a power struggle to topple Herod's sick and evil regime. But we end up with, well, very simple yet quite extraordinary story of a baby born in a cave by the light of a star. A baby with the promise of peace when we'd all come here expecting to cover a war. This is David Jessel outside Bethlehem.
And that's the news tonight, on a remarkable day when we have reported on events whose significance we are only just beginning to understand. The talk of peace appears to be replacing talk of war. We'll be back with the latest developments tomorrow night with David Jessel in Jerusalem and the rest of the news team in Palestine. Until then, from me, Martin Lewis, good night.
Bethlehem, Year Zero. The news with Martin Lewis.
A baby born in a Bethlehem cave gains international recognition as King of the Jews. After astonishing scenes outside the small town of Bethlehem yesterday, foreign dignitaries have arrived to pay their respects to the infant who is being hailed as the Jewish Messiah. Other headlines: what is a Messiah? Do these ancient writings hold the answer? A crisis cabinet meeting at Herod's headquarters, but has the king finally gone mad?
From the heart of Rome, how will the empire strike back at any mutiny in Palestine?
And the treasures of the East, gold and priceless ointments for a baby hailed as king.
Good evening. For the past 4 nights in our regular Star Watch feature, we've been following the extraordinary course of the comet which many believed would bring chaos and war to the Middle East. Last night, the so-called Star of Wonder came to rest over Bethlehem, where a miracle baby was born in a cave beside a humble farm outhouse, supposedly to a virgin mother from Nazareth. Bethlehem, a small town outside Jerusalem, is now the focus of international attention. The baby has been formally recognized by the 3 ambassadors from the East, the so-called wise men, as the new king of the Jews. Some religious extremists go further, claiming that the child, born in miraculous circumstances, could be the saviour of the world. The birth of the child, now seen as the true message of the star which has been lighting up the eastern sky, is an immediate challenge to the religious and political leaders in Palestine and a severe threat both to Herod and to Rome. Here's David Jessel.
Bethlehem, hometown of the hero king of the Jews, David, is waking up to the news that it now has another claim to fame. The extraordinary series of events began yesterday, when the star, which has been heading in from the east for the past 3 months, finally came to rest overhead. A short distance outside the city, in a cave used as an agricultural outhouse, the Nazareth couple, on their way to Bethlehem to register for the imperial tax census, gave birth to a baby boy. Shortly afterwards, the mystery convoy carrying the delegation of Eastern diplomats, the so-called 3 wise men, swept into the tiny hamlet on the outskirts of Bethlehem. There had been widespread speculation about their mission. Earlier this week, it paid a courtesy call on King Herod, which ended in diplomatic disaster when the ambassadors told him that the star was leading them to a new king of the Jews.
Even more astonishing than that men of such importance should come all the way across the Judean wilderness to this hovel here is the fact that once they had arrived here, once they'd found the baby who had been born, they had absolutely no hesitation in proclaiming him King of the Jews. What's more, they backed up this official recognition by bringing some of the costliest gifts ever brought by any visiting head of state. David Jessel on the outskirts of Bethlehem.
And we'll have more on those gifts later in the programme. The delegation of the so-called wise men is now reported to have left the area. Herod has made it plain that he intends to crush any threat to the throne, and their recognition of the so-called baby king puts them in considerable danger. For a report on what further measures Herod is likely to take, here's Richard Lindley.
Herod's rage has been mounting ever since the disastrous meeting with the ambassadors who broke the news that they were looking for a new king. The network of intelligence agents which keeps this restless province under control has been working day and night, but it's now clear they were looking for the wrong person in the wrong place. They'd been searching here in Galilee, historically the centre of Jewish resistance to Roman rule and Herod's authority. Many known resistance leaders were arrested as soon as the mission of the wise men announced the imminent arrival of a new king. Herod is particularly sensitive over the fact that the baby has been hailed as the anointed one. Herod himself, who is only half Jewish, never received this mystical sign of authority. Anointment, according to Jewish law, is a sacred, ceremonial and symbolic act involving holy oil which is smeared on the forehead of a true king. The act confers legitimacy on the monarch and also gives him a divine authority. If there were to be a rebellious challenge to Herod's rule, it's very doubtful that he could take any coherent action against it. To begin with, there's no sizable body of Roman troops anywhere in the immediate area. And then Herod's state of mental health is causing considerable concern. Palace sources say the terminal syphilis that Herod's suffering from has now spread through his entire body, badly affecting his judgment. The fear is that Herod will order savage reprisals against anyone supporting any new claimant to the throne, even if that claimant is a baby. Richard Lindley in Jerusalem.
More details are beginning to emerge about the mother of the new infant and her husband. Although currently living in Nazareth, according to friends, Mary was born in Jerusalem. She is in her lower teens and has no brothers or sisters. Mary's father, Joachim, is a successful farmer, owning large flocks of sheep. He is said to be of the house of David, hence the visit to Bethlehem to register. Her mother is Anna, a very religious woman from a family of priests. Joseph, the man she is married to, is considerably older. He's said to have been married before with children of his own. He too is distantly related to King David. Joseph is a skilled labourer working in the flourishing construction industry around Nazareth. With me to discuss the human dimension of the story is Anne Atkins, an expert in family matters. And how difficult is all this going to be for Mary?
Well, it must have been absolutely terrifying for her to have discovered she was pregnant. We talk a lot about gym-slip mums over here, but what we often fail to appreciate is in this kind of traditional society what a very, very serious crime it was for her to have got pregnant with somebody else's child. And I would say she's borne up remarkably well. But of course the difference here, and it's a bit of a mystery, I have to say, is why her husband hasn't divorced her. And that hasn't really been adequately explained. It almost suggests that he believes some of these claims that are being made about the child.
And obviously he's going to be needed to support the child.
Yes, he will be needed, and that I would say he has made all the difference, the fact that he's decided to go through with the marriage.
If it is indeed a miracle child, won't there be a huge extra burden of destiny upon everyone involved?
Yes, there will be the most terrific expectations on him. Those who believe these messianic claims will be expecting him to lead Israel into, you know, permanent liberty and all the claims that are being made that the Messiah would set the captives free and heal the sick and all that kind of thing. And I would say, in order to have a sane upbringing, he would have to spend a large part of his youth studying what some of these expectations are going to be.
Very briefly, what sort of a future do you predict for the child?
If he is indeed the rightful Davidic heir, I would expect the most terrifying future. I would have thought his parents would have to go into hiding almost immediately to survive the current political climate.
Anne Atkins, thanks very much indeed. You are watching Bethlehem Year Zero, a special bulletin on the unfolding crisis in Palestine. Still to come, the war that never came. Did the astrologers get it wrong? Was the answer in the scriptures all the time? And what price Eastern generosity, gold, myrrh and frankincense make a birthday present fit for an emperor? Over to Rome now for the Empire's reaction to today's developments and our Rome Affairs correspondent, Dennis Toohey. Dennis.
Well, Martin, Rome for the moment is studiously playing this down, trying to take the heat out of the situation. The Emperor's press office points out that Palestine regularly comes up with these King of the Jews figures. If they succeed in building a movement around them, it soon fizzles out or is crushed by the authorities.
So Rome isn't unduly panicked by this latest turn of events?
No. No one sees any serious threat to the imperial order from a baby. If it's a new religious leader, Rome has always allowed its Jewish subjects freedom of worship. And if they want to believe that their God has suddenly taken human form, that's entirely a matter for them. Caesar Augustus is himself regarded as a god in parts of the empire, and unless things get out of hand, he is prepared to be tolerant. What's more, I understand that he has every confidence that his appointee, Herod, will manage the situation with tact and discretion.
Dennis, thanks very much. Now, throughout the week, there's been confusion about the real meaning of events in Palestine. Astrologers claim that the star heralded a violent revolution, but all that's happened is the birth of a baby. Dr. Tali Land was the first scholar to uncover the full significance of the prophecies, and earlier, on the line from Jerusalem, I asked her, how did the stargazers get it all so wrong?
I don't think the stargazers got it wrong. I think the stargazers could find great support for their kind of claims if they looked into the Bible. For example, if you look in the book of Numbers, there's this prophecy which says, there shall come a star out of Yaakov and the scepter shall rise out of Israel. You have a star on the one hand and the scepter on the other. This is the star, and this is the symbol of kingship.
So if the baby is born to be a king, could we be in for a violent future?
This is clearly a very violent prophecy indicating that this Messiah is going to be very strongly anti-Roman. I must, however, add that if you look through the Bible, you will see other prophecies also suggesting a king of David, a son of David, And this son of David is going to be a gentle person who will bring peace and prosperity with him.
Finally, the extraordinary gifts lavished on the baby by the Eastern ambassadors. Gold was presented to a child born in an outhouse. Scents and ointments for an infant who came into this world in decidedly unhygienic conditions. Linda Bryans is enjoying a little taste of luxury.
I'm with Joe Zayas, who can tell us a little bit more about these stupendous gifts brought from the East. Gold is obvious enough. And what about frankincense?
Frankincense is worth its weight in gold. Stuff you see here is incredible value. The reason is because it's not found here. It's imported by camel caravan by way of the Sinai, from North Arabia, Yemen, Somalia, all the countries which lie quite some distance from here.
And myrrh, what's special about myrrh?
Myrrh comes from a tree in Arabia and in Yemen. It's something which is regarded as divine. It's something which has a divine origin. It's from the gods and is used as a gift to the gods. These three things are equal in value. The spices are equal in value to the gold. That's the reason that these things are some of the most important gifts that one could give to someone who is regarded as divine.
We are getting news of a multiple killing in Bethlehem. Looking at ambulances racing down the main street. And I gather we've been joined on the line by David Jessel, who is at the scene. David, we're getting reports that these killings have been carried out by Herod's special intelligence units. What are these units doing?
Well, special intelligence units is one way of describing them. Here they're known as Herod's death squads. He's sent them out before to snuff out dissent and to round up anyone who poses any sort of a threat to his rule. Technically, they're meant to bring their captives back to Jerusalem for execution, but it's not unknown for them to carry out executions themselves on the spot.
And it's definitely a targeted raid on Bethlehem ordered by Herod himself.
Yes, it seems to be a lightning raid out of Herod's mountain fortress, that's Herodian, from where I'm speaking to you, to Bethlehem itself, just a few miles down this road. Whether their aim is to arrest the parents of this controversial baby or to crack down on any fledgling resistance movement that might grow up around him, we don't yet know.
An extreme reaction, even for Herod.
You're right, but Herod, as we know, is totally unstable. There's no knowing what further mass arrests or even executions he may order in order to deter any further threat to his kingship or to deter any threat to the authority of Rome.
David, thanks very much. And we will, of course, bring you more news on the developing crisis in Palestine as it happens on this channel. And we'll have full reports in tomorrow night's news. Until then, from me, Martin Lewis, good night.
Bethlehem, Year Zero. The news with Martin Lewis.
Massacre in Bethlehem. At least 20 children are killed by Herod's armed militia. The disaster the stars and the comet predicted has finally happened. As he hunts down the so-called new Messiah, Herod has sent in the death squads. They're already calling him the Butcher of Bethlehem. Is this an atrocity too far for the mad tyrant and his reign of terror and torture? In other headlines, the diplomatic fallout. The envoys from the East head back home after threats that they too could face arrest and execution by Herod.
And I'll be reporting on the tide of human misery as the refugees from the Bethlehem massacre stream south to the Egyptian border and to safety.
Good evening. At least 20 children, all of them boys less than 2 years old, have been murdered in a town just outside Jerusalem. Details are still coming in, but the massacre seems to have taken place on the instructions of Rome's appointed king of the Jews, Herod. It happened in the town of Bethlehem, just 5 miles to the south of Jerusalem, made famous in Jewish history as the birthplace of King David, and where the baby hailed as the new Messiah was born 2 days ago. We're live now to Richard Linley in Bethlehem. Richard, what more can you tell us?
Well, Herod's troops have effectively sealed off Bethlehem, and you must understand I'm talking to you under severe reporting restrictions. Strict censorship's been imposed by Herod's ever-vigilant security apparatus. and some of my colleagues have already been prevented from sending their reports. But the stories we're hearing from Bethlehem suggest there's been a terrible method in King Herod's madness. The death squads came in the small hours of this morning. They conducted house-to-house searches, looking for homes with young children. These children were then taken outside, in some cases literally torn from their mother's arms and killed on the spot.
But what about the numbers, Richard?
They were all baby boys, 2 years old and under. As for the numbers, well, it's reckoned that at least 20 of these young children were slaughtered.
Any indication as to why Bethlehem was selected for these reprisals, or indeed what the motive was?
Well, with Herod, it's often hard to talk about any rational motive. But of course, Bethlehem has been the focus of a lot of activity in recent days. You'll remember that the three-man delegation from the east that arrived yesterday came to the outskirts of the town bearing gifts for someone they claimed was a new king of the Jews. That's something that's clearly enraged Herod and got Jewish nationalists very excited indeed.
Well, we seem to have lost that line to Richard Linley. As he said, the situation is very sensitive there. We will try to go back to Richard Linley just as soon as we can. Meanwhile, we're getting more pictures coming in of the scenes in Bethlehem. These pictures come from our mobile satellite link, which is just outside the accident and emergency hospital. And as you would expect, scenes of confusion, panic, desperation. These ambulances clearly containing some of the victims of the reported massacre. So maybe there is some hope that some of the children have survived. Our reporter Linda Bryans is actually at the hospital now. Linda, what more can you tell us?
Yes, I'm at the local hospital where from dawn this morning a pitiful convoy of ambulances and grieving relatives has been arriving here. It seems that virtually without exception the children were, well, they were all babies really, were all dead on arrival. With me now is a doctor from Accident and Emergency. What sort of injuries did these babies have, Doctor?
Terrible injuries, most of them stab wounds, and a lot of them there are head injuries. And most of the babies and children arrived dead, as most of them had lost a lot of blood and nothing could be done to save them.
Have you ever seen anything like this before?
Not on this amount of casualties. I've seen, but not to this extent.
Were you able to save any of these babies?
Unfortunately not, because they arrived dead, and as I told you, most of them bled a lot before coming.
Now, presumably the hospital has some sort of disaster plan. Did you put that into action?
Yes, we have applied this disaster plan, and everybody from the team is working. They have been working since the early hours of this morning, non-stop working, but they couldn't do a lot as they were expected.
What sort of effect has all this had on the staff at the hospital?
Well, they were very, you can say, they were not expecting this, and of course it was a strange thing to them.
Doctor, thank you very much indeed. And from Bethlehem Accident and Emergency, it's back to the studio.
Only 3 days ago, in our report on the miraculous births to two cousins, Elizabeth and Mary, we brought you these pictures from the Bethlehem Maternity Hospital. All these babies were born in the last week. The horrifying thought is that a king, however paranoid, however tyrannical, should seek to preserve his throne at the cost of so many young and innocent lives. So, is Rome likely to condone this massacre, or will it judge Herod as having gone too far? Over to our Rome Affairs correspondent, Dennis Toohey. Dennis.
Well, Martin, Rome's position is straightforward. Anything that is necessary to keep order is justified. Palestine is notoriously troublesome, and religious extremists constantly challenge and provoke the authority of Rome.
But how does a baby threaten the authority of Rome?
Well, if it's a baby around which some sort of dissident movement can form, obviously it is a threat. But it's fair to say that Rome is concerned that this may be an overreaction to the fairly minor event of a supposed miracle birth, which may be nothing more than a media event and which can hardly present much of a genuine threat. The emperor has asked to be kept in touch with the situation, which could be fairly ominous for Herod, whose health, both physical and mental, is causing some concern. Herod's been allowed to run Palestine on a pretty loose rein. But the mass executions of dissidents were one thing, infant genocide is another.
Dennis, thanks very much. You're watching Bethlehem Year Zero, a special report on the unfolding crisis in Palestine, with the news tonight that as many as 20 babies have been butchered in Bethlehem. Still to come, could the atrocity spark a new uprising against Roman rule in Palestine? The people are fleeing from villages surrounding the massacre site, and the three-man mission from the east is also on the run from Herod's death squads. And that baby. Did the child hailed as the new king of the Jews escape Herod's dragnet? Herod's latest outrage has caused a mass exodus of young families from the Bethlehem area, reviving memories of the historic exodus from Egypt to Israel more than 1,000 years ago. But today, the traffic is in the other direction. David Jessel was in Bethlehem soon after the massacre.
It's a ghost village. Most of the young people of Bethlehem have taken to the road. If Herod can order the senseless slaughter of babies, there's no knowing what else he might do. Herod seems quite literally to have gone mad. So, where have all the people gone? This is where, on the road out of Palestine, it's an exodus in reverse. The Jews left Egypt 1,500 years ago under the leadership of Moses, the baby in the bulrushes, but with the mark of divine greatness upon him. Now, because of another baby born in equally humble circumstances and hailed as a future leader, these people are on their way back south to Egypt. Egypt, too, is ruled by Rome, but these people aren't running away from Rome. They're running away from the mad king of the Jews. Also smartly on the move, the three-man delegation who so offended Herod by claiming they had come to pay homage to the new king of the Jews. They were hustled out of the country, escorted out of Palestine under armed police supervision. The miracle child and his parents are said to be among the fugitives, but for all too obvious reasons, surviving children are hidden from view. Do you think all these people are right to flee south to Egypt?
Look, I mean, what would you do if you were confronted with genocide? I mean, what would you do as a parent if your children's lives were at stake? Absolutely. I mean, the first thing that a human being has to do is to protect his life. And if he's living in a place where it's totally exposed, I mean, they've got to get out of here.
David Jessel reporting. And we are getting pictures now, the scenes outside the hospital in the aftermath of the massacre. It seems that every single ambulance in the area has been mobilized. Such is the extent of the slaughter. And our court correspondent, Michael Cole, is with me now. Michael, what lies ahead for Herod after this incredible outrage?
Now there can be absolutely no doubt that time is running out for Herod. As we've discussed before, Martin, Herod is a sick man, and the word I'm hearing from within the palace is that he'll be dead within a year.
Is he likely to be deposed before he dies?
Well, he has removed any possible challenge from among his immediate family, even to the point of having executed 2 of his own sons. As for some sort of uprising or revolt by the Jews, well, it's very hard to build a rebellion around one small baby, even a baby with so-called messianic qualities, a baby who has received exotic presents from foreign dignitaries.
Michael, thanks very much. And we're now going back to Linda Bryans, who is at the Bethlehem Hospital. Linda, do we know how many babies have been killed?
Well, we've had no more reports of casualties, so the provisional total is now 22. 22 children of 2 years or less, because typical of Herod's mixture of madness and method, it's 2 years since the planets began to align with their prediction of a possible rival king to the Jewish throne. Now, one piece of news that I can reveal, some happier news amid today's terrible events, is that the so-called miracle baby of Bethlehem has been named.
And that name is?
Well, the name is Yeshua in Hebrew, or as we would say, Jesus.
And is Yeshua or Jesus safe?
Well, according to reports filtering out of Bethlehem, I can confirm that he is not among those murdered. He is almost certainly among the refugees fleeing far south to Egypt. And not far behind him, of course, are Herod's soldiers.
Linda, thanks very much indeed. And so we come to an end of our coverage of this astonishing week in the Middle East. For a final analysis, over to David Jessel.
Yes, it's been quite an astonishing week, and not at all the week we expected. We all came here summoned by the star and the promise of war. Well, the astrologers who first predicted war in the Middle East got it wrong for once. Not even in this notoriously mutinous area of the Roman Empire has there been even a hint of an armed uprising. What we ended up with was an atrocity, but a not altogether unexpected reaction from a paranoid king, Herod, to the threat of a rival. That rival turned out to be a baby, not likely to present much of a threat to the empire, not at least in the immediate future. A 2-day-old refugee on the way to Egypt is not likely to change the world.
David, thank you. And that's the last of these special news bulletins from Palestine, from David Jessel in Jerusalem, from the rest of the news team, and from me, Martin Lewis. Good night.